implementing ESG help businesses meet the advanced criteria of modern markets? And challenges and solutions for implementing ESG.
Hello there, you're tuning into Bizline on VTV International. I'm Hoàng Hằng. The climate limits of the Earth we're living on today are constantly being challenged. Moving towards sustainable and inclusive development, integrating ESG principles and frameworks into enterprises' strategies and goals is considered the key to future development. Implementing ESG helps businesses comply with legal regulations on the environment, society, and governance, and meet the advanced criteria of modern markets, partners, and investors. Businesses consider ESG a solution, but almost all companies, including those adopting ESG standards, believe that Vietnam still has many limitations regarding awareness and implementing ESG on the ground. Not to mention, there are challenges in raising capital, high product prices, and low market competitiveness. Therefore, urgent solutions are required to address outstanding issues, including attracting high-quality FDI capital to green the economy. This is the main focus of this week's Bizline.
This corporation has earned a spot on Corporate Knights Global 100 list of the world's most sustainable corporations. According to its representative, one of the challenges when implementing ESG in Vietnam is convincing domestic suppliers to participate in its sustainable value chain.
So it is roughly 6% more expensive for you to build a green building compared to a conventional one. When we talk to many suppliers, they are very open about having sustainable practices in the operation. But of course, there are suppliers who probably are not plugged in so much with the, let's say, the multinational environment or exporting the goods outside Vietnam. So here I would say, yes, more can be done. Probably there is more incentives or more encouragement that needs to be done to encourage them to move forward on this journey towards decarbonization.
The entire process needs to be looked at, and that means for us, for example, we need to make sure that our suppliers are also part of this ESG, environmental, social and governance, because only then we are able really to cover everything.
Having operated in agriculture and sustainable food production, this Dutch company focuses on eliminating antibiotics used in livestock and aquaculture to ensure consumer health. However, according to data from the Department of Animal Health, only about 63% of livestock facilities in Vietnam comply with the correct dosage and course of antibiotic use.
The other industry peers with whom we are competing, let's say, also need to play that same game, and in the end we need to have a level playing field. That's of course an important topic in general when we talk about sustainability. Level playing field in the industry in terms of...
The financial burden is one of the biggest challenges in developing and implementing ESG. Investing in green transition requires a large amount of money. Declining orders are another difficulty that businesses are currently facing. Therefore, their green transformation plan may be delayed because it requires a large amount of capital. According to experts, the longer this process is delayed, the more chances businesses will lose to increase exports.
Khó khăn đầu tiên thì tôi cho rằng nó liên quan đến cái việc mà cái nguồn tài chính xanh cho cái việc chuyển đổi. Vì rõ ràng đây là một quá trình chứ không phải là ngày một ngày hai chúng ta có thể chuyển đổi được. Và cũng không có nghĩa là cứ mục tiêu muốn chuyển đổi hay là yêu cầu bắt buộc khách hàng mà chúng ta có thể đáp ứng được ngay. Thì để cần làm cái việc này thì chúng tôi có cái nguồn, phải cần một cái nguồn tài chính tương đối lớn.
Businesses consider ESG a solution, but almost all companies, including those adopting ESG standards, believe that Vietnam still has many limitations regarding awareness and implementing ESG on the ground.
Within the business environment, there are different interpretations and different understanding levels of what green is. I mean, if you are a relatively small Vietnamese company or an SME, for example, then you probably won't have a fairly sophisticated understanding of what green is or what, how to access green financing or who are the financial institutions who could provide funding, and then what are the conditions under which that funding is provided.
So if you run a factory in Vietnam, it is really difficult to access green energy. If you were opening a factory in the Nordic countries, you would be able to just plug in your machine and buy quotas on green energy. So there is a lot of inflexibility in the system on how you purchase this. If you produce your own energy in an industrial zone, how can you access that? How much can you access?
Funding and investment for deploying ESG are huge, and businesses face an array of standards and regulatory frameworks. It's confusing even for the most switched-on businesses. They don't know where to start, how to deploy it, and what the final results are meant to be. Above all, the process is costly. These challenges are causing significant obstacles for businesses in implementing ESG. Joining us from Ho Chi Minh City is Professor Andrea Stoffer, Country Director of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, FNF, in Vietnam, to discuss this issue. Thank you so much for joining us. Amidst the global supply chain restructuring, Vietnam has emerged as one of the countries with significant breakthrough opportunities thanks to its resource and human capital strength. Presently, as green transitions emerge as an unstoppable force, is recognizing the regulations related to ESG important? And if so, why?
First of all, you are absolutely right. Vietnam has emerged as a country with significant opportunities and immense improvements during the last years and decades. So that it's very important also to react to new trends and to new demands in the world markets, especially when dealing with business partners from abroad. And if we just have a look at ESG, E means environmental, that means having a look at the climate change problems, the water supply, biodiversity. Social is also impacting the workplace of the people, the security of the work, demographics, and so on. And to put it in a nutshell, ESG emerged from a niche product or a niche idea in the last, let's say, 10 years ago, to a very, very important and very demanded issue in the world. And it's a high demand by business partners and by other countries to Vietnam. And so thus it's very necessary for Vietnam to react to this demand, to react to the regulations and to that what the consumers and the business partners would like to have.
According to recently published ESG reports, Vietnamese businesses' readiness level is promising. What are the key drivers?
In my opinion, the key driver is the demand. There's one key driver, the demand. And the demand for ESG principles is very high by business partners and especially by companies who would like to do business, trade, foreign direct investment or whatever with foreign companies. So I think the key driver is the demand, and that's what we should have in mind.
How important is foreign investment in adhering to regulations related to ESG?
Many business partners of Vietnam, many countries already have implemented ESG standards into their policies. So when dealing worldwide as part of the global value chain, Vietnam has to recognize that. And to give you one example, the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, which came into place some time ago, is also to be adapted to in Vietnam. And I know that the Chamber of Commerce, the German Chamber of Commerce, AHK in Vietnam, is very actively promoting that. So foreign direct investors and foreign business partners would like to have it. And due to this demand, Vietnamese companies, businesses, and also, of course, the authorities and media have to react to that.
Transforming production lines following the ESG regulations is becoming mandatory for many businesses. It is also part of the roadmap to achieving green certification for businesses to access major export markets, such as the EU. The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, for example, requires importers to report the carbon emissions associated with their products. If emissions exceed regulatory standards, businesses must purchase carbon certificates at EU-regulated prices.
3 năm gần nhất thì chúng tôi đang tập trung rất nhiều vào câu chuyện chuyển đổi xanh. Đấy là một trong cái khái niệm mà về môi trường trong cái bộ quản trị phát triển bền vững ESG là bao gồm môi trường, xã hội cũng như là quản trị. Thì đối với cái ngành sản xuất may mặc của Tổng công ty May 10 chúng tôi thì chúng tôi cho rằng là cái việc chuyển đổi xanh hiện nay nó không hẳn chỉ là xu thế mà nó là yêu cầu bắt buộc của các cái nhà nhập khẩu. Hiện đang là các cái hãng thời trang lớn mà May 10 chúng tôi đang cung cấp những cái sản phẩm thời trang cho họ.
The business is also deploying green energy, such as installing rooftop solar power arrays for factories. In addition, the company also closely manages its raw material sources and applies energy-saving technologies.
Mà nguyên liệu xanh hiện nay thì có hai cái dòng nguyên liệu. Một là những cái nguyên liệu có gốc từ tự nhiên, là những cái sản phẩm hữu cơ mà có thể tạo ra từ trồng bông, xe sợi, dệt vải, và những cái cây, các cái loại cây trồng khác mà có thể tạo ra thành vải như là tre, như là cà phê, như là cây đay. Cái nguyên liệu xanh thứ hai chúng tôi tập trung vào đó chính là cái nguồn nguyên liệu tái chế hoặc là những nguồn nguyên liệu có thể có gốc từ câu chuyện nhân tạo. Tuy nhiên thì cái thời gian mà có thể tự phân hủy trong tự nhiên là ngắn nhất. Chúng tôi đầu tư cái hệ thống nhà xưởng cũng như là hệ thống thiết bị theo cái khái niệm. Ví dụ như nhà xưởng thì chúng tôi hiện nay đang yêu cầu các cái tổ chức tư vấn cũng như là những cái đầu tư để lấy những cái chứng chỉ như là chứng chỉ LEED về tòa nhà xanh và môi trường làm việc xanh đối với người lao động.
According to experts, businesses need to recognize regulations related to ESG if they wish to continue trading with major markets. Otherwise, they may lose their potential to integrate into global value chains. Companies that meet ESG standards also increase their opportunities to access long-term investment capital, thereby establishing long-term partnerships.
We have an ESG standard, a global ESG standard coming from our mother company. Also the suppliers are working with us because at the end of the day, if they don't start to change, if they're not following the ESG standards as we have the international standards, then there will be out. There will not be our suppliers anymore. So it's very important for the suppliers as well to follow this. Otherwise, we need to look. Otherwise, we need to definitely to look for different suppliers or international suppliers if there's no supplier able to comply with our standards here in Vietnam.
I mean, for the manufacturing sector as well, there is huge potential as businesses look to green their supply chain. If Vietnam as a country was to look at kind of issuing some form of bond or green bond or sustainable bond, that would also help. I guess we remain very optimistic on the opportunity.
The potential, benefits, and risks are clear, so the important thing to do now is for businesses to quickly integrate ESG criteria into their sustainable development strategies. Turning ESG into a growth driver would improve their competitiveness in global trade.
ESG transformation requires substantial investment and it isn't easy to reap the benefits quickly. That's why ESG criteria were once thought to hinder the revenue growth of business navigating globalization. What are your thoughts on this?
Now, of course, that's true. It costs a lot of money, but I think every investment in the future in a business at the beginning costs some money. But every business, every country should have in mind what are the long-term effects. And if you can see that the long-term effects are positive, for example, by not implementing or not applying ESG standards, there would be huge environmental pollution. There would be some problems in getting new staff to your work because you don't fit in the requirements of national labor standards. In the short run, it is definitely expensive, but if you have a look at the big picture and what's happening in the future, in fact, it is saving money and it's very good, not only for the society, but also for the companies who are prepared to apply these standards. And as I said before, if there is a demand from business partners, it would be very stupid not to react to that demand and to maintain the old business, which is not applying these standards. And this would be only very short-sighted. So reacting to the demand of the customers, the clients, the business partners on the one hand, and on the other hand, having in mind the positive effects on revenues in the future makes it very attractive to apply all these ESG standards.
Will ESG pose challenges for businesses in global trade expansion and hamper the way of FDI companies investing in Vietnam, especially high-tech semiconductor companies and industrial park investors and businesses?
Of course, there are a lot of challenges because, to be honest, not all Vietnamese companies are currently prepared well for that. Perhaps they know that there are ESG standards in place, but they do not have the structure, the governance structure in the company implemented. So it costs a lot of time and money, and that's absolutely clear for me. But having in mind again the long-term profits, and also that all other countries or most of the countries and business partners are also have the obligation to meet the standards and to do that, to implement that, makes it easier for Vietnamese companies, because I think we can see here we have a kind of equal competition. Other companies and other countries also have to deal with that. That's the reason why I consider that there are challenges, but on the other hand, these challenges could be tackled and could be solved.
The entire factory roof is covered with solar panels, and emission reduction technology has been applied to all their production lines. This factory meets every sustainable development standard of this Japanese enterprise in Vietnam, ensuring green aspects of production processes and technologies. This is also a must when investing in industrial parks.
We set a goal of reducing carbon emissions to zero by 2030. The entire solar power system accounts for about 40% of the factory's electricity consumption. We are cooperating with the industrial park to expand solar power production.
Resolution 50 of the Politburo has set a target to attract about 150 to 200 billion USD of FDI capital in the period 2021 to 2025 and 200 to 300 billion USD in the period 2026 to 2030. Economic experts believe that to attract investment, especially from strategic investors and multinational corporations, as required by the resolution, Vietnam needs to perfect its institutions and policies, improve its infrastructure, and create favorable conditions for foreign direct investors. Converting to the eco-industrial park model will aid Vietnam in attracting high-quality FDI capital flows.
Chúng tôi cũng xem xét kỹ, sàng lọc kỹ, cụ thể là có một số những trường hợp mà có tiềm ẩn gây nguy cơ ô nhiễm môi trường cao, tập trung rà soát, hoàn thiện lại cái báo cáo về hiện trạng phát triển các khu công nghiệp, xây dựng cái định hướng thu hút vào các khu công nghiệp trong thời gian tới, cũng như là cái việc chấp hành các quy định của pháp luật về bảo vệ môi trường.
The transition towards a green, circular economy in industrial parks is taking place, especially when major markets set green standards barriers for goods. If there are no clearer and more consistent guidelines on green criteria, Vietnam will lose the opportunity to attract high-quality investment projects and its advantages in the global supply chain.
Despite the positive outlook, low-carbon projects are often considered high-risk and costly. Financial sources for ESG regulation compliance are also huge. The process also takes time. So what steps should be taken to make Vietnamese companies more attractive to investors?
I think the actual level of practice in Vietnam is still low. So there's a lot of room for improvement for Vietnamese companies to do that. And I just have in mind one recent report from PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, saying that 80% of Vietnamese businesses made ESG commitments already, or they plan to implement that, but only 70% of them, but already 70% of them indicate that they lack of understanding and preparation. And only 1 quarter of all companies said they are really well prepared. They have the governance structure in place. So what they have to do a lot of things. It takes a lot of time, and it is not very easy to do that. But my recommendation for a kind of solution would be, first of all, a training and information campaign. I see that VCCI and the Vietnamese authorities are already demanded to act and to work on that very intensively. Secondly, also the foreign business partners and the foreign chambers of commerce and institutions, like the German Chamber of Commerce, could support. And I know that in the German Chamber of Commerce, AHK, they have already one small department with people who are dealing with this issue, and they could, in strong cooperation with the Vietnamese VCCI, with the Vietnamese authorities and companies, support to implement. And thirdly, I think that also you as a media have a very important role to play to support this transition and to support Vietnam to get acquainted and to apply these ESG standards for the profit and for the benefit of the society, the population, and of course the companies.
Given that the legal framework is a core pillar for attracting investors and promoting ESG adoption, what step is Vietnam taking to ensure its regulatory environment is conducive to climate finance?
I know that Vietnam's regulators are already working on that very, very intensively. But we should always have in mind that on the one hand, there are the regulation, the framework, which is a very essential part, by the way. But on the other hand, the implementation sometimes is lacking. And we know that in Vietnam, there are some brilliant and some very good ideas and regulations, but how to survey and how to supervise and how to implement this is always a problem. And I think there should be a more intensive cooperation and advocacy, advisory with foreign stakeholders who could support. For example, our foundation, the Frederick Naumann Foundation in Vietnam, has recently started a legal dialogue with Vietnam. And that could be one starting point to cooperate with organizations like our foundation or with other foreign institutions to intensify the work, the regulatory work on that, to start this process in a better way and to make it more successful in the future. For example, by sending experts from abroad to Vietnam to start a dialogue on eye-to-eye level with Vietnamese partners.
Many banks and global investment funds consider environmental, social, and governance (ESG) efforts important in investment decisions for projects worldwide.
Tất cả các ngân hàng và các cái tổ chức tài chính thì đều có những cái bộ tiêu chí để hỗ trợ các doanh nghiệp tiếp cận với nguồn vốn tài chính xanh và bền vững. Nhưng câu hỏi đặt ra là các doanh nghiệp đã xây dựng chiến lược ESG chưa và đã đưa tính bền vững vào trong chiến lược cốt lõi của mình chưa?
Green finance has been deployed in Vietnam for more than 10 years. As of the first quarter of this year, outstanding green credit debts reached nearly $25 billion, accounting for about 4.5% of the economy's total. However, experts assess that the current proportion of green credit is still small.
Increasingly, you also see more alternative financing channels, tools. For example, many ESG ratings are developed to assess how green, how sustainable each business is, and investors are increasingly focusing on those ESG ratings.
And internationally by participating in almost all supply chains. So, the country's transition to green is inevitable.
Vietnam plays a very important role in this transition. Recently, Vietnam announced its hydrogen strategy with very ambitious targets by 2030 and 2050 to achieve a higher percentage of energy consumption through hydrogen and alternate sources. And it is very important for ASEAN countries to come up with an agreement.
According to statistics from the Vietnam Association of Foreign Investment Enterprises, FDI capital pouring into green and sustainable growth sectors in Vietnam increases by an average of 10 to 13%. This shows that Vietnam is committed to green transformation and pressures investment attraction policies to adapt to changes.
your thoughts on the potential for unlocking ESG in Vietnam in the near future?
I would like to draw the bigger picture. I think if you see what Vietnam has achieved in the past, just having in mind the recent report of World Heritage Foundation 2024 on economic freedom, Vietnam is ranked on place 59 out of 179 countries. At the first glance, this doesn't sound so brilliant, 59 out of 179 countries. But Vietnam is the country, besides Poland, by the way, who emerged the fastest from the beginning of this report 30 years ago to today. There's no other country who moved so fast regarding economic freedom. And today, Vietnam is correctly called a moderately free country. And the US currently is also considering to lift Vietnam to a market economy status. I think these are very positive signs, also regarding ESG. But what World Heritage Foundation's report also clearly stated is that regarding the legal structure and the governance, there is a lot of homework to be done for Vietnam. And this we should have in mind, that in these areas Vietnam needs to work on. And I think I'm quite optimistic that Vietnam can deal with that issue.
Once again, thank you so much for joining our Bizline program.
Oh, you're welcome.
Experts also indicate that over half of the surveyed companies are collecting data on health and safety, 54%, labor practices within the company, 51%, supplier ethical business conduct, 48%, and carbon emission, 47%. Therefore, it is crucial for Vietnamese businesses to quickly integrate ESG into their sustainable development strategy, harnessing ESG as a driving force for growth and enhancing their global trade competitiveness. Vietnam is working toward becoming an attractive destination for international green capital by improving its legal environment. The government, financial institutions, and businesses are trying to develop ESG criteria that effectively mobilize green investment capital for sustainable development. And on that note, we wrap up this edition of Bizline. Stay with us for more news and updates, or you can download our app VTV Go from App Store or Google Play for additional content. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time.